Let's talk about public service, let's talk about diplomacy, and we are joined by somebody who has worked in the public service for 41 years. 41. Joining the civil service in 1981 as a legal officer in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and rising through the ranks to the level of ambassador to the United Nations office in Geneva. Hey. All the way. Balozi is his name, Piero Owade. Not PLO, PRO. Yeah. Ambassador Philip Richard Owade is our guest. He's now senior legal and public policy consultant. Good morning, Balozi.
Good morning.
How are you doing?
I'm doing okay, and I'm glad to be here. My first time in this great room.
Very good. That's the hot seat of the Situation Room. How does it feel?
I can feel it.
Karibu sana. You will tell us, the things that, just from your own experience in public service, you've served there in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, joining as a legal officer, going all the way to, ambassador to the UN in Geneva, and then coming back in the country, working in the Ministry of Devolution, and then going from Ministry of Devolution, going to the devolution itself, working in the county government of Sigei, where you're the county attorney until just this year, the other day.
Until August.
Okay, we'll talk about all those things. Siti, welcome Balozi with the day's proverb.
Yes.
This is a man who's very widely traveled, so don't give him directly to this is the country. No. He's an ambassador, he knows these things.
Yes.
So describe the country.
Well,
in very many ways.
It was a kingdom until 1966.
That is one hint.
When the king was deposed.
Two hint.
Yes. It had been colonized by the Belgians, but that didn't last very long. The United Nations or League of Nations came in, did a few things here and there, and suddenly it was under British protection. So it was called British Protectorate, and then it became an independent country at some point. And it has a neighbor that has very similar features to it. In terms of size, in terms of population, the similarities.
In terms of even the ethnic.
Yes, the ethnic composition. It's colored copy. You copy paste, it's same.
The ethnicities in this African country and its neighboring African country.
Same.
They are both in Africa.
And they're both in Sub-Saharan Africa and
in Southern Africa.
No, East and Central Africa.
They are East and Central.
In fact, they are members of the community.
But kingdom, what confuses me is...
Once upon a time. It no longer is. It was a kingdom until 1966.
I'm thinking of Rwanda, Burundi.
I see you're on the right track.
Yeah.
It's very good. Those are the two countries that actually have the same features that you've mentioned. So yes, you're right. But we're not in Rwanda, we are in Burundi.
Burundi. Yes. Yeah, it's Burundi.
The proverb.
Two skinny and weak dogs cannot fail to overcome a fierce animal.
Two skinny and weak dogs cannot fail to overcome a fierce animal.
Yes.
Well, what's your interpretation of this proverb?
What is the interpretation?
Yes.
I think the interpretation is that they are skinny and
weak.
And
they are two.
But they are two.
Yes.
I think there are two things. One, they must be hungry and voracious. They want to capture their feed. And then two, the fact that they are two. So, they say two is better than one. I think that is the gist of that proverb. Yeah. So
what's the inner message?
The inner message is that if you are united, even if you are, that one person sometimes cannot fulfill a challenge, but if they are two, it is easier if they are united. So because now they will concentrate on how they capture the other animal.
Okay. Two hands are better than one.
Two hands are better. That's a simpler way of putting it. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. More straight way of putting it.
Kidole kimoja. Kivunji chao.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. So, Balozi, you've worked in the public service for very many years. You've done very many things in terms of, your career, joining the public service in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, going all the way, and then coming back in the country, being deployed to the Ministry of Devolution at the onset of devolution in the country. But let's first of all start with just understanding, working in the Foreign Affairs Ministry for so long and rising to the rank of ambassador. So not everybody who is an ambassador is an ambassador. And not everybody who's not an ambassador. Okay, so what is an ambassador?
Well, ambassador is the person who represents his country in a foreign country. I think that is the simplest definition of an ambassador. Of course, there are what you call career ambassadors, like me. In other words, you rise through the ranks, and through your work, you are promoted to become, appointed to become an ambassador. Because all appointments of ambassadors are by the head of state. But then also there are those who are appointed who are non-career. Can be appointed from any profession or from any discipline to become ambassador. But that, I think, basically describes who an ambassador is and how they are appointed.
So you can have somebody who has a title ambassador, but they are not the senior most person in a mission.
Yes, that is possible. You can even have ambassador who is home-based at the ministry headquarters. Actually, for a long time, Kenya's the foreign ministry in Kenya was quite restricted. You could only have ambassador in the conventional sense, that you became ambassador to a specific country or to the UN organizations. But a lot of countries liberalized their service, so you can have an ambassador who is in the headquarters ministry. You can be an ambassador in the ministry headquarters. You can also be an ambassador, but not a head of mission. And there are a number of missions where we have that, particularly in multilateral stations like Geneva, New York, Addis Ababa, and several others. So that has opened space, because it used to be very congested, where career diplomats who really deserve to be ambassadors would not have the chance, because there was a time there was preference for political appointees. Because of obvious reasons. So that has opened a lot of space. And right now, I think a number of career officers rise to the level of ambassador, and that is the highest rank of service you can get, in the ministry. It is an honor, it is a prestige, and
Is there a place where they train ambassadors?
Yes, there is there is a training institute by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs that trains ambassadors. Once they are appointed, they are inducted in that training program. It also trains even career officers. So there's a good training program in that. Just recently, I think the president talked about it, or somebody talked about it yesterday. The launch of the Kenya's a new foreign policy 2024 to replace the old one of 2014. And that foreign policy emphasizes the aspect of training and the role of the training institute, the ministry's training institute. Yeah.
So an ambassador is a diplomat.
Yes.
Who qualifies? What you have to go through to qualify to be a diplomat? I remember I wanted to be a diplomat for the longest time. My father insisted on it, made me go study all the languages, everything, and that was going to be the thing. But how do you, at the end of it, when you do the whole international studies and you do all of that and you study diplomacy and everything, who then becomes this person who, number one, represents the diplomacy or represents the foreign policy of the nation, or then represents them at an ambassadorial, deputy ambassadorial in mission status? Who's that person?
Diplomats, if you go to, because the whole realm of diplomacy is defined in the Vienna Convention on Diplomatic Relations. That actually defines who a diplomat is or who diplomats are. So a diplomat basically is a person who works in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. As you have said, you have correctly said, there are various ranks. You can join at a senior level. There used to be what we call a third secretary, or you start as a cadet, that is a trainee, and then you rise to the level of third secretary, then you rise to the level of second secretary, then first secretary. But now we have opened it up. Now you have councillor, you have first councillor, you have second councillor. Those are the ranks in diplomatic service. That you get when you are in the ministry or when you are in a mission. Now, a diplomat, you become a diplomat when you are now posted to a foreign mission. So you can be posted there, as I said, as a third secretary, as a first secretary, as a second secretary, as a councillor, and then at the top range is the ambassador. And so I think in brief that's how. But to become a diplomat, to answer your question, you have to be a member of the ministry or a member of staff of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs.
So there's a certain level of training, certain expertise you must have acquired, at least some kind of experience that you have. Even if you start at the cadet level, at the very least, we ask you to have, some kind of training. So you can't operate a petrol station, for example, and then we say that you can go and be ambassador to Belgium, for example. It wouldn't make much sense, would it?
No,
you can go to Rwanda, to DRC. Okay.
You are right. So there's actually a very extensive training program, particularly for career diplomats, from the point that you join the ministry. There are training programs both locally and internationally. There are various institutes that, and Kenya has had a very distinct career training program, the diplomacy training program at the University of Nairobi. That has trained not just a lot of Kenyan diplomats, but a lot of diplomats from the African region as well. Yeah, because as you say, it is an art. There are a lot of skills you have to acquire before you can represent your country abroad.
Because that's what we're talking about, isn't it? Really, it's representation. It's really the crux where you could be dealing with just an easy conversation between two country representatives, and essentially what could turn into a spat, or essentially what could become a world war, God forbid. But that's the kind of delicate balance that folks at that level deal with, isn't it?
True. That is very true. It's very delicate. There are a lot of nuances in diplomacy. There are some things that a diplomat do not say. A friend of mine used to define diplomacy as the art of telling someone to go to hell in a manner that he looks forward to the trip. So you don't just tell someone, you go to hell. But
there's a beautiful place called hell.
It's always warm.
And you can reside there in eternity.
And if you follow this wide path, it's not thorny. It's well paved.
Well lit.
So
I've always wondered, when we talk about a mission, ambassador, we hear of ambassador. Once in a while, you hear of a deputy ambassador. Who else do we have in a mission? Because after all, that mission represents the country.
Yes.
So who else is there?
Yeah, that's a good question. As you say, the head of mission would normally be an ambassador, but sometimes it may not be at the rank of ambassador. It may be what in French they call charge d'affaires. That is the head of mission, but is not at the rank of... there can be a charge d'affaires temporary, ad interim, they say AI, ad interim. Or it can be at the rank of charge d'affaires, that you've decided that this mission will not be headed at ambassadorial level, but will be headed at the charge level. That's the head of mission.
What's the thinking behind that distinction where you have an ambassador who doesn't have the rank, a charge d'affaires, who doesn't have the rank of an ambassador and one who has. What's the thinking?
Well, that would be determined by the sending state. Although in our case, that is rare. Most of our heads of missions are ambassadors. But as I was going to say, there are three types of missions.
Okay.
The normal embassies, let's say our embassy in Tokyo, for instance, is headed by an ambassador.
Yeah.
But those heads of missions that belong to the Commonwealth are called high commissioners. These are distinctions some people don't get. That what is the difference between a high commissioner and an ambassador? So high commissioners, that's a distinct, that was made very distinctly for the Commonwealth countries. But of course, Commonwealth has expanded. You've had even countries that were not, particularly in Africa, countries like Rwanda that were not under British rule asking to join the Commonwealth. Then the third is what you call permanent representative. Those are ambassadors to the international organizations, like the UN, like, various international organizations. They're called permanent representatives.
Like the European Union.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then below the rank of ambassador, to answer your question, you could have deputy ambassador or deputy high commissioner. Then below that, you have other officers. We have councillor. Councillor now, as I said, is now split into, you have first councillor, second councillor, then you have a first secretary, then you have a second secretary, then you have a third secretary. Those are what I would call political officers. But in addition to political officers, you have attaches. Depending on where you are, you may have an education attache. That is somebody seconded by the Ministry of Education. You may have a press attache, seconded by Ministry of Information and Broadcasting. You may have a labor attache, for instance, in a mission like Geneva, where you have the ILO and there are a lot of labor issues. You have a labor attache. You then
defense attache. Defense.
Yeah, you have yes. You have defense attache in a number of countries where you have defense issues. You have a defense. So then you have that is what. Then of course you have. That's the career. That's the political. Of course, then you have the support staff. Like secretaries, drivers, and that kind of thing. So that is what constitutes. The sizes are different. You have there are missions which are very small in size. You may just have an ambassador and 2 or 3 other, officers below it. But there are those that are big in size. I mean, where you have like 12, 13, 15, 20 officers below the rank of ambassador.
In places like, let's say, Los Angeles, where we have a consulate general, how does that relate to the ambassador who's in Washington?
Yes, the ambassador in Washington is Kenya's overall representative to the U.S., particularly in terms of bilateral relations. But then in big countries like Washington, you may need, like U.S., you may need to have a presence, like you said, in Los Angeles. And that is where the consul general comes in. His duty would be to take care of interests of Kenyans in that region, in terms of, visas, in terms of any those who are in distress, citizens in distress, and that kind of thing. But the overall representative in the country is the ambassador to Washington. And
who's the boss of all the ambassadors?
The boss of all the ambassadors? The president.
Directly?
Is the appointing authority, yes. They are all directly or indirectly, because they report through the minister or through the principal secretary for administrative matters in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs.
Okay. At what point does mission or the consulate, all of these, beyond making sure that the affairs of citizens of the representing country in that nation are taken care of, at what point then do we see engagement with the hosting nation issues and things like that?
Engagement with host nations is on a very regular basis because, as I said earlier, one of the purposes of diplomacy is representation. You represent your head of state, you represent your country in that country. So there are a lot of communications, for instance, that you need. There are a lot of discussions that you need to have with a host country, and that is usually through, of course, the foreign ministry of the host country. But of course, it can expand into other ministries, other departments, of course, diplomacy has grown tremendously. Initially, it was very confined to, mere representation between the head of the ministry and the mission. But now there are many players in diplomacy. There are many players. Diplomacy has grown, particularly into commercial areas, issues like trade, issues like investment. So you would be interacting a lot with the industry, with the private sector, with the NGOs and so on and so forth. Yeah.
Ambassador Philip Richard Owade is our guest this morning. He has worked in Kenya's foreign service for many years and then come back to Kenya, worked in devolution, worked in Siaya County, and now is a senior legal and public policy consultant. The role of diplomacy in shaping global relations. That's our topic. We now know that the Ministry of Foreign Affairs is working on reviewing or revising or coming up with a new foreign policy for this country. That means that we have had a previous foreign policy for the country. We keep asking ourselves, does Kenya have a foreign policy? And if indeed we actually had one, did we follow it? Do we follow our foreign policy, and what informs it?
Yes, thank you. That's a very good question. Yeah, Kenya has always had a foreign policy. Although up to 2014, it was unwritten. But we knew what our foreign policy. There are certain principles that guided Kenya's foreign policy that included non-interference in internal affairs of other states, non-alignment, pursuit of peace and security, and so on and so forth. But from around 2010. Around 2010 or around 2008, Kenya, under the leadership of President Kibaki, embarked on developing a written foreign policy. It took a long time to develop it, but eventually it was concluded in 2014, a fairly comprehensive document that discussed all aspects of foreign policy. So a new one, because it was done in 2014, that is 10 years ago, is about to be launched. I participated in a consultative forum just Monday this week at KICC with various stakeholders, including students, the professors, the NGOs, the press, and so on, that is fine-tuning this policy. So yes, Kenya has a foreign policy. I think what used to happen, or maybe up to now, is that the public may not really know what this policy is about. But I think now we are in an era where public communication has become very important, and the role of the press has always been important. And I think the way the ministry is doing it is the right way to do it, so that the public moves along with In fact, even one of the issues we emphasized at that consultation is that there should be regular consultations or briefings with the NGOs, with all stakeholders, because under this new constitution, the issue of public participation is very important.
What has it been previously? I mean, we know what the policies of, certain nations are, and usually that policy is in relation to other nations.
Yeah.
In terms of how you're going to operate geopolitically, and say that, well, we're going to be partisan when it comes to certain, Israel conflict, for example, or we are going to say that we're not going to touch that. Ours is going to be one of a pacifist nature and things like that. What have been the overall tenets of Kenya's foreign policy, and what terms do we usually look at? Because we'll see that. I remember, I think it was Thomas L. Friedman for the US who said, well, you should actually look at policies in terms of 10 years. A decade should then be able to hold a policy, and then you can tweak it every now and then. What has it been for Kenya?
Well, generally, foreign policy is based or derived from the national interest. You first of all, you must know what your national interest is. So foreign policy is then utilized to advance your national interests. Now, your national interests could be global. You could be having global national interests, but you also have regional interests. Now, your national interests will also define your relations with neighboring countries, for instance. If you are talking about Uganda, for instance, we know what our national interest is, and that is what would now define how you engage with Uganda, for instance, or with other countries for that matter. Then you move, for instance, to the East African community, where our national interest is issues of trade. How do we expand our trade? How do we export our products and that kind of thing? So national interest, I think, is the most important thing in foreign policy. Yeah.
One of the things that has been, should we say, piquing my mind is when somebody has been in the foreign service, as you had, with all the demands that it has, matters of propriety, understanding how it is to manage situations, especially the difficult ones, then you move from there and you move to the county system. Let me not preface it with any adjectives. Let me just ask. Talk a little bit about your experience and the differences or the similarities, if there are any.
Yes. That's a good question, because I can say without fear or favor that the Ministry of Foreign Affairs is fairly unique, fairly cultured, fairly organized, with clear rules and order. Etiquette are very important things in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. You may not find that, with due respect, in other ministries. So when I came back after I finished my tour in Geneva in 2010, that is when we just launched, promulgated the Constitution in which month of
August?
In August. In August of 2010. I had just come back in July of 2010. Now, the then head of public service, Ambassador Francis Muthaura, who had the privilege to deputize in New York when he was the permanent representative in New York, a man I have tremendous respect for, and I've talked about him a lot in my book that I'm about to launch, titled Between Law and Diplomacy. Ambassador Muthaura felt that I needed to move to the then Ministry of what do you call it? The Ministry of, before devolution.
Local government.
Ministry of Local Government. It was then actually the office of the Deputy Prime Minister and Ministry of Local Government after the Constitution, after the Constitution was promulgated. Now, the role of that ministry was critical at that time, because the Chapter 11 of the Constitution on the devolved system of government wanted a number of laws to be passed. You had to operationalize Chapter 11. So Muthaura felt that with my experience and my background and my legal expertise, I could support the work of that ministry. So I was posted to the Ministry of Local Government as secretary. Secretary is the title, the rank just before below the permanent secretary. And we worked hand in hand under the leadership of then Deputy Prime Minister and Minister for Local Government, Honorable Musalia Mudavadi. Professor Karega Mutai as the PS. May his soul rest in eternal peace. He just passed on about a month ago or less. And so that was the reason why I moved there. And we passed all what we call the devolution laws. The County Governments Act, the Transition to Devolved Government Act, the Public Finance and Management Act, and so on and so forth. There are 5 of them. But as just to answer your question, it was a shock to me, and it was how can I? What is this ministry? I didn't even know where they were. You know, I didn't know.
It's the Ministry of Local Government.
I didn't even know where they were. But in retrospect, it was a very good move for me because, as I said, I joined the ministry at a very early age. I was posted out very early to Tokyo. My first posting came after I had served for hardly 2 years. And so you get to know, in a situation like that, you get to know the outside world more than you know your own country.
Yeah.
You are a stranger in your own country. You know, I remember there's a time there are many things I couldn't stand after you've served abroad for a long time. You know, you acquire certain things. Yeah, so it helped me to get to know my country very well. Because in the Ministry of Local, it was a government. Those of you who knew the Ministry of Local Government, it was really a government. It was. With the branches everywhere within the country.
Yeah.
And so I traveled around this country, and then as a member of the Transition Authority, also representing the ministry, we were responsible for preparing counties for devolution. So I am proud to say that I have traveled in all the counties in Kenya except 2. And there are very few people with that kind of, you know.
True.
And again, I've traveled in foreign countries in over 100 countries. So you know, I tell people that when one door closes, another door opens. So I never resist change. When change comes, accept and adapt it, because we do not know you know, what it portends for you. So I enjoyed work in the ministry, much as it was a shocker for me at the first time. The work was a lot because we had deadlines to pass all these pieces of legislation. We had to put them in place within 5 years. And that was from 2010 to 20 before the next elections. Then after I retired in 2016, the county government of Sigei in 2018 asked me to be the pioneer county attorney of Sigei, of course deriving from my experience in devolution. Of course, from local government we became the Minister of Devolution and Planning, where I was also secretary from before I retired, from 2013, after the 2013 elections, 2013 to 2016. So after I retired in 2016, I was a consultant for a while in private practice until Sigei County government requested me to join them. So I have run the whole race. I've been at the international, I've been at the national, I've been at the county in the village. And I was living in the village for 6 years. And there's nothing as good as that, you know, because you really... So it has given me an all-round experience, and I talk about these things in my book, which I will be launching soon. Between Law and Diplomacy is the title.
From a diplomatic level, have you ever seen the foreign policy of a nation fail?
Yes.
And how so?
When foreign policy of nations do fail. For instance, when you know, diplomacy is the first defense. You know, so you advance diplomacy because you want to keep you want to be at peace with your neighbors and so on. So where, for instance, now you go to war, you know, then it means foreign policy has failed, diplomacy has failed.
Yes.
Yeah, so they are.
So can we say then that if we look at the conflicts of the world today, or those ones that have happened, obviously in the world, there we see that the first, because usually when a ton of bricks falls, there's got to be that first one that is loose.
Yeah.
Right. So would you say that at the failure of diplomacy, at the failure of foreign policy to actually work, with diplomacy being the tool of foreign policy, that we start to see that would be the first brick that is loose and pulls away at the entire thing?
Yeah, certainly, and that's why even when it fails, when for instance, when it fails, but you still never give up, and that is how now other countries come in. For instance, in the case of Africa, in our region, maybe the East African community would come in. Beyond that, the African Union would come in to try to restore normalcy, to address the challenges that led to a breakdown of diplomacy, and that is how the UN comes in, and the UN has a major role in under the UN Charter to maintain international peace and security.
Does it really?
Well, it does. It has
a role, okay.
It has a role.
Does it have the teeth?
Whether it lives out its role is a different conversation.
There are many cases where it has succeeded. There are many cases where it succeeded, whether it is through peacekeeping operations or through embargoes and this kind of thing. It has succeeded in a lot of, and it has resolved a lot of conflicts. Of course, the point to be made is that the structure of the UN as it was set up, UN came up after the Second World War, and it was the victors really from that war that determined the power relations. They became, for instance, the P5, the permanent five, the permanent members of the UN Security Council with veto powers. That worked well until for them. It worked well for them, and even for international order, it worked until around the 90s, when now the situation started changing with the breakdown of the Berlin Wall, for instance. So now there's a clamor, a very legitimate clamor for reform. It has been on for even when we were there in the 90s, when I was in New York in the 90s, we were always talking about the reform of the Security Council. But the challenge is the permanent members do not want to be quit of those powers that they have, particularly the veto power. So veto power, I think it worked during the Cold War. But after that, there are a number of challenges that I think we need to be more...
To see how it works.
Yeah.
Which Balozi is what now brings... Just going back to the question that Ndu was asking, where individual countries' foreign policies and whether they are as effective when it comes to bigger boys in the room, right? So you may have a foreign policy, yes, that says, we are non-aligned, we are this and the other, but then you or your big brother or the one that supports you a lot is supportive of a certain route, and you end up just getting caught in between, right? So let's say America is supporting Ukraine in the pushback against the invasion by Russia, okay? And if you decide as a country you do not want to get involved in that story, but America wants you to make a statement, you make a statement. You've become a non-aligned member of the NATO. If it's the issue of the Middle East, whether it's the invasion of Iraq or right now the conflict between Hamas and Israel that is affecting Palestine as a whole, what is the state of Kenya supposed to be saying, or its policy saying, and what does the policy of its friends who have bigger power and bigger say, and where do they touch, where do they conflict, and what should Kenya do in such instances?
Yeah, that I think is a challenge, particularly for developing countries that because in your relations you still want to keep certain order, certain respect for powerful countries, what I may call powerful countries. But at the same time, you have your own national interests to protect. For instance, many years, particularly when I served in the UN, the issue of the Palestine, for instance, the conflict between Israel and Palestine, Kenya used to play a very balanced role where you are not on one side or the other, because our interests in that war is that there should be peace. So in resolutions, for instance, at the Security Council, that tended, let's say, to condemn one party or the other, Kenya would abstain. And that abstention was really a statement that we are not choosing this side or the other. So you have to make a balance. What are your interests? What are your national interests? What are your relations with that country? In the case of Ukraine or Russia, for instance, what are our trade interests in that region? What are our political interests, for instance? So that would define. So where you are being now prevailed upon by a superpower, you still have to find a way of handling that.
Of handling that particular matter.
Yeah.
When Luis Moreno Ocampo took up a case against 6 Kenyans to the ICC in The Hague, America did not say, no, leave Kenya alone. Or Omar al-Bashir. Last year, when, what's his name, Karim Khan. Yeah, took up the matter, and there was an arrest warrant issued against President Putin of Russia. Joe Biden said that he welcomes the decision of the ICC to issue an arrest warrant against Russian President Vladimir Putin. Right? Today, Biden is saying, let me be clear once again. Whatever the ICC might imply, there is no equivalence, none, between Israel and Hamas. The issuance of arrest warrants against Israeli leaders is outrageous. We will always stand with Israel against threats to its security. That, of course, is America looking at after its own interests. Why is Kenya left in such cases? A vote is to happen at the UN Security Council. Or basically, let's just say a vote is to happen at the UN. We are not in the Security Council. Where do we play? And what would inform our decision there?
Yeah.
What would our foreign policy have to say on such matters?
What?
What would our foreign policy have to say when it comes to such matters?
Yeah. Again, as I said, you would have to look into your national interest. I think this is what I will keep on emphasizing, because it is the national interest that will define even decisions you make.
The vote that you make.
Even the vote that you make.
So is the ambassador at the UN supposed to take instructions expressly from the president on such a matter?
Well, instructions, there are several ways of going about it. You have, as an ambassador, particularly to the UN, you have your brief, you have your, you know your bottom lines, what I can call a bottom line. You know you can't vote this way, you can't decide this way. So that is a guidance. But being on the ground, you can find how to maneuver about it. Where you don't have express instructions, or where you think you need express instructions, you seek it from the Minister of Foreign Affairs. So you will get where the matter is maybe so delicate that the basic instructions you have do not cover it. You will seek express instructions. I remember, for instance, in 1995, I was the deputy permanent representative of Kenya in New York, under Ambassador Francis Muthaura as the permanent representative. And we were reviewing the NPT, the Non-Proliferation Treaty, which had been concluded in the 70s, but there was time for review and extension. A matter that the Americans had a tremendous interest in. As non-aligned countries, we felt that this treaty should not be can be renewed, yes, but on certain conditions. There are certain conditions we wanted to fulfill. Americans didn't want anything. For them, they just wanted an extension. So I was, Ambassador Mutawara was on leave, so I was chargé when those negotiations were going on. And we were under a lot of pressure from the American diplomats in New York. But we knew, because we were members of the non-aligned movement, so I was with the non-aligned movement, but I knew that pressure was being put even in Nairobi. So what I did, and I've written about this extensively in my book, what I did was to make sure that Nairobi was briefed every day. And this is an important aspect of diplomacy, reporting. You have to report. Every day I filed a brief. So that I'm saying the vote is coming tomorrow, or this I'll take this position. If you don't get any response, then you know you are safe. Because the most dangerous thing you can do is to make that mistake. And I remember the American ambassador telling me, because we were some of the countries that were transigent, that stuck to the non-aligned position until the end. And I remember being asking me about instructions that you are talking about, that do you have instructions on this matter? Then, of course, as a diplomat, I couldn't tell him I don't have instructions. I said, yes, I have very firm instructions. Then he told me, we have realized there are three types of missions. There are those who work without instructions.
Yeah.
There are those who work on instructions.
Yeah.
And there are those who give instructions to themselves, and they purport it to come from the headquarters. Yeah, so it is very important in a situation like that that you are in constant touch.
And you get your express instructions. Ambassador.
There are situations, though, that you may ask for instructions, and they don't come.
So you make...
So you
make a decision.
You make the best of judgment, depending on,
Ambassador Philip Richard Owade, thank you for joining us. A senior legal and public policy consultant. He's been our guest this morning.
This is the Situation Room, the only way to start your day.